This PowerPoint will cover the first half of chapter 17. We want to start with talking about the Columbian Exchange. One of the things that's going to happen when Columbus discovers the New World is this is going to lead us to a transfer of people, animals, plants, and diseases between the Old and New World. It's also going to be known as triangular trade, which we'll take a look at this image in just a little bit. But it's important to note that when the Europeans arrive in the New World, the demographics of the New World are going to drastically change. The Native Americans there, or the Amerindians, lack immunities because of the isolation of North and South America. And so we're going to see a tremendous loss of life to the Amerindians. Central Mexico is going to go from a population of about 13 million natives to 700,000 natives in the first 100 years of the Europeans arriving to the New World. That's a 95% loss of life. The Mayan and the Incas are going to lose 75% of their population, and Brazil is going to lose 50% of its population. And this is all just figures that are happening in the 16th century, so the first 100 years that the Europeans are there. What's wiping the Amerindians out is diseases. The first disease that we see arrive in the Caribbean in the year 1518 is smallpox. Then by 1530, measles has arrived. Then diphtheria, typhus, influenza, and pulmonary plague are all diseases that the Europeans bring with them. Malaria arrives to the New World around the 17th century, and that's predominantly going to be brought with the African slave trade. Looking at triangular trade, we're going to see going from Europe to Africa, textiles, rum, manufactured goods. From Africa to North America is predominantly slaves. From North America to Europe are going to be things like sugar, tobacco, cotton, which cotton was already in the Old World. When I say Old World, I mean Europe, Africa, Asia, places like that. But it's going to be a new type of cotton. Now, let's do a list. I want you to make a list. The first list that I want you to make, you should title it From Europe to the New World. So here's a list of things that are going to be going from Europe to the New World. The Europeans are going to introduce wheat, olives, grapes, garden veggies, cattle, pigs, horses, and sheep. And the introduction of the horse to the New World is going to completely change the way that the Amerindians hunt. From Africa and Asia to the New World, so our next list is going to be a list of plants and animals that are going to go from Africa and Asia to the New World. So from Africa and Asia to the New World, we have rice, bananas, coconuts, breadfruit, sugar. These are things that the New World did not have yet. What's going from the Americas, from the New World to the Old World? We have maize, also known as corn, potatoes, manioc, beans, chilies, squash, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, peanuts, and chocolate. There's going to be other plants that the Europeans are going to use for dye, for clothing, and medicine, and different types of cotton and tobacco. These are some other things that are going to come. So this is an explosion when the Europeans arrive in the New World of trade is going to be taking place, and it's going to drastically change the lifestyles of people both in the New World and in the Old World. When we look at the Spanish Americas and Brazil, and the Portuguese in Brazil, we're going to see that they've got to come up with a way to control their people. So the section now we're going to look at is titled The State and the Church. When the new colonies were very difficult for the kings of Spain and Portugal to control, and the reason is because of the vast distance from the New World to the Old World. So the kings of Spain and Portugal are going to set up viceroyalties. So viceroys is what they're going to be called. And basically this is a representative of the king in the New World. They speak for the king. They have the power of the king basically in the New World. They're technically not the king, but they have a lot of the control over the people, and they do what the king wants them to do. And remember, they don't have instant contacts. It's going to take months and months and months. And it could even be upwards of a year, maybe even more, depending on weather conditions for traveling, for boats to get back and forth from Europe to the New World. So the Spanish and the Portuguese set up viceroys, basically a royal representative in the New World to control the people. The Catholic Church is going to be the one who oversees the transmission of Christian of the Christian belief of Christianity into the New World. They're also going to oversee the transmission of the European languages and culture in the New World. They promoted conversions in intellectual life by using things like the printing press. There's going to be a lot of Catholic universities and Catholic schools that are going to be built in the New World that are all going to facilitate the growth of knowledge, specifically with Catholicism in the New World. One of the ways that the Catholic Church sought to gain converts was to convert the Amerindian leaders. If you can get the leader to convert to Catholicism, to Christianity, the hope is that others would follow their leader and want to convert also. A lot of them are going to hold on to old rituals, which the Catholic Church is going to combat and try to get the people to change. Not all of the Europeans were abusive to the Amerindians. There was definitely a lot of abuse that was going on and mistreatment of the Amerindians. But you do have some exceptions to that. You have men like Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a settler turned a priest. He lived in southern Mexico, and he saw the terrible way that the Amerindians were being treated, and so he fought to ensure the protection of the Amerindians. The biggest achievement in his lifetime was the new laws of 1542. And so he gets he helps get this. He promotes this to be passed. And what it's going to do is it's going to limit the ability of Spanish settlers to compel the Amerindians to labor for them. And so he's a very important individual for us to note. When we go to the next section of chapter 17 and we look at the colonial economies, we're going to see that silver mines and sugar plantations are going to be the things that dominate the colonies in Latin America. Silver mines are predominantly going to be found in places like Peru, Mexico, Bolivia, and your sugar plantations in Latin America. Caribbean islands are places where that's going to take place, and Brazil is going to be a big place. There was gold in Latin America, but silver is going to bring in the most money for the European colonies. The richest silver mine was Potosi, which is in present-day Bolivia. Now, silver is not as valuable as gold, but there was a tremendous more amount. I don't know if I said that the right way. There's way more silver than there is gold in the New World, so that's why silver is going to bring in the most money. Potosi, they're going to see the population grow to 120,000 people. And so this is almost like this is a boom for a mining town, basically. The process that they're going to use in the silver mines is smelting, and this involves mercury, which is very, very poisonous, and so this is going to cause just awful health conditions for the people in Potosi. One of the labor systems that the Europeans established is called the encomienda system, and this is a system of forced labor on the Amerindians. They're going to force, the Europeans force the Amerindians to work for them. And so this system is going to be exchanged for the Mita system, which is going to require the Amerindians. What it does is it has the Amerindians men to work for several months every 7 years. So every 7 years you report. It's mandatory that you work for the Europeans. But what's going to happen is as the native population goes down, because the majority of them are dying from disease and things like that, as the Amerindian population goes down, we're going to see an increase in the African slave trade. And so the Europeans are going to start to bring over African slaves. The Portuguese dominate sugar production in Latin America. They had already experimented with this on the coast of Africa prior to them coming to the New World. And so they are going to enslave the Amerindians. They switch to African slave labor. And what they realize is there's a preference from the Portuguese for African slave labor because they're more resistant to the diseases, because they have more immunities to European diseases because of the contact between Europe and Africa in previous centuries. Now, looking at society in the New World, very few Spanish nobles came to the New World. Most of them were very happy to stay in Spain. They had power there. Some hidalgos come. These are lesser lords. Also some merchants come, some miners come, some lawyers, even criminals come to the New World. But for the most part, many people migrated from Spain to the New World were looking for an opportunity, were looking for a chance to get rich. These were people that were not necessarily very well off to begin with. Most people in the New World were what we refer to as Creoles, which are white people that were born to European parents in the New World. We're going to also see a large number of Africans brought over from the slave trade. There's going to be a group of mixed people, mestizos and mulattoes. A mestizo is someone who has usually it was a European father and a native mother. Mulattoes would be a European father usually and an African mother. And then there was also a group of people called the castas, which was mixed between Indian and African. And so you have the social structure was basically worked out to where the Europeans were on top, and they're going to oversee the majority of the church and the government. Below them, you have wealthy American-born Creoles. Again, these are people that are 100% European, but they're born in the New World, so those are your Creoles. They're going to oversee the majority of the agriculture and the mining in the New World. Below them, you have the mestizos. Below the mestizos, you have the mulattoes. And the lowest class were Africans, native Indians, and the castas are going to be the lower class people. The Indian elites made alliances with Europeans, and this is going to help gain them some security and some protection and some economic benefits also. These alliances were not necessarily all that common, but they did take place. Indigenous commoners suffered the most. When we look at Africans that came over, there was already a group of Africans that lived in Europe. And so when the Portuguese and really started going down and exploring the west coast of Africa, some Africans did come back with them because they were forced usually. And so there were a group of Africans that had already learned to speak Spanish and Portuguese, and they had converted to Catholicism. These Africans looked down on other Africans that were brought to the New World that hadn't assimilated to European culture as much. Slave resistance was something that was very common during the time period. Slave resistance was often seen as sabotage. They would sabotage a lot of the slave, some of the equipment and things like that. Malingering was another way of resistance, and basically this is working very slowly and not trying to accomplish that much. It's a way to protest. Running away took place. There were slave rebellions. Some slave groups that ran away formed communities. They would go into the wilderness of the New World and form their own communities. Brazil attracted less Europeans and had way more Africans than any other colony. There was a huge gender imbalance because there was a greater desire in Brazil for men to perform manual labor versus women. Brazil's society is going to be more heavily influenced by African culture because they're going to they're going to bring in the vast majority of Africans are going to end up in Brazil than anywhere else. When we get to chapter 18, we'll look at this more closely, the Atlantic slave trade and a lot of the atrocities that took place during that. Manumission is an important word for you to know. The Spanish and the Portuguese did allow for some of the slaves to legally buy their freedom. And so when women gained their freedom, their babies were also free. And some analysis that you need to take from this is that there is some growth to the free black population, African population in Latin America during this time period. So that gets us about halfway through chapter 17. In the next class, we will try to finish chapter 17. So the next section we'll start in class will be English and French colonies in North America.